house stood silent at 1717 East Delmar Street. Too silent? The kind of silence that makes the hair on your arms stand up, that makes your stomach drop before your mind even catches up to what's wrong. It was June 7th, 1992, a Sunday morning in Springfield, Missouri. The birds were singing. The summer heat was already starting to build. And somewhere inside that modest brick home, 3 women had simply, vanished. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room and felt it? That wrongness? That sense that something terrible happened here, even though everything looks perfectly normal? The coffee pot is on, the shoes are by the door, the purses are on the dresser. But the people who should be there aren't. That's what awaited the friends and family who came looking that morning. And what they found, or rather, what they didn't find, would haunt this community for more than 3 decades. I need you to stay with me on this one, because this isn't just another true crime story. This is a mystery that breaks every rule, a puzzle with missing pieces that someone out there is still hiding. And I truly believe that the answer might finally be within reach. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe that 3 women deserve to have their truth told, then do me a favor right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Because the more people who know this story, the closer we get to the ending these women deserve. Let me take you back to that night, June 6th, 1992. Sherrill Levitt was 47 years old. A single mother with an easy smile and an open-door policy for her daughter's friends. She worked as a cosmetologist, cutting hair and listening to people's problems and building a life one client at a time. Her daughter Suzanne was just 19, beautiful, popular, about to graduate from Kickapoo High School. The future stretched out in front of her like an open highway. That Saturday night was supposed to be the last hurrah. Graduation had happened the day before. Suzanne and her best friend Stacy McCall, also 19, also blonde, also radiating that teenage invincibility we all remember, were going to party with their classmates and celebrate the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Stacy was planning to stay the night at Suzanne's house. Her mother, Janice McCall, dropped her off that evening with a kiss and an I love you and a reminder to be careful. Words that would echo in Janice's mind for years to come. The girls went out. They hit a few graduation parties. They saw friends, laughed, made promises to stay in touch forever. The way teenagers do when they don't yet know that forever isn't guaranteed. Around 2 a.m, they ended up at a friend's house where a small gathering was winding down. Janelle Kirby and her boyfriend gave the girls a ride back to Suzanne's house on East Delmar Street. Everything seemed fine, normal. They pulled into the driveway and Suzanne and Stacy got out. They were giggling about something. They waved goodbye. That was the last confirmed sighting of Suzanne Levitt and Stacy McCall. And Sherrill? And the last time anyone could place her was around 11 that Saturday night. She'd been at a friend's house, playing cards, having a glass of wine, being her usual warm and welcoming self. She left to go home, probably arriving before midnight. She never saw another sunrise. I've read thousands of pages about this case. I've listened to hours of interviews. I've traced every theory, every lead, every dead end. And what strikes me most isn't what we know, it's what we don't. Because here's the thing about the Springfield 3 that makes seasoned investigators shake their heads. There was no crime scene. Not really. No blood. No broken windows. No signs of a struggle. The front porch light's glass globe was found broken on the front step, but even that is debated. Did it mean something? Or was it just coincidence? And the door was unlocked when people started showing up the next day. But Sherrill often left her door unlocked. This was Springfield in 1992. This was a time and place where people still trusted their neighbors, where women still felt safe in their own homes. That trust was about to shatter. By Sunday afternoon, concern had turned to panic. Stacy's mother, Janice, was the first to sound the alarm. Stacy was supposed to be at work at a water park by 10 that morning. She never showed up. She never called. And if you knew Stacy, you knew that wasn't like her. She was responsible, dependable. She would never just disappear without a word. Janice tried calling the house. No answer. She drove over herself, and what she found made her blood run cold. The cars were there, all 3 vehicles belonging to the women. Sherrill's purse was inside, her driver's license and money untouched. Stacy's purse was there too, and Suzanne's. Their makeup, their medications, everything a woman would take if she were leaving voluntarily, but no women. The family dog, a small Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, was inside, unharmed but clearly distressed. If there had been a violent struggle, wouldn't the dog have been hurt too? If strangers had forced their way in, wouldn't the dog have barked, alerted someone? Nothing made sense. And then there was the answering machine. This detail still haunts me. When Janice McCall played back the messages, there were 2 waiting. One was clearly a friend calling for Stacy. The other was strange. A woman's voice, obscured by static or deliberate disguising, saying something that seemed threatening. But before investigators could analyze it properly, before anyone understood its potential importance, one of the anxious family members accidentally recorded over it while trying to use the phone. That message is gone forever, and we'll never know what it said. The police were called. At first, they weren't overly concerned. 3 women missing together? Maybe they went on a spontaneous trip. Maybe they were visiting family. Adults have the right to disappear if they want to. But within hours, it became clear that this was something else entirely. Sherrill wouldn't leave her job without notice. Suzanne wouldn't miss her graduation celebrations. Stacy wouldn't abandon her responsibilities and terrify her mother. Someone had taken them in the dead of night, from a locked house, in a quiet neighborhood, without a trace. The question that would torment this community for decades was just beginning to form. Not just where are they, but something even more chilling. How do 3 grown women disappear without a single scream, a single sign, a single witness? Someone knows the answer. Someone has always known, and I'm going to tell you everything I've learned about who that might be. The Springfield Police Department has handled thousands of cases over the years. Missing persons, homicides, drug crimes, gang activity. But nothing prepared them for what arrived on their doorstep in June of 1992. I've studied how law enforcement operates. I've seen how they process crime scenes, how they build timelines, how they separate fact from speculation. And in those first critical hours after the disappearance was reported, I can see the exact moment when this case went from concerning to terrifying. There was no crime scene. Think about that for a moment. Every investigation starts with physical evidence. Blood tells a story. Broken furniture tells a story. Footprints, fingerprints, fiber traces. These are the breadcrumbs investigators follow to catch predators. But at 1717 East Delmar Street, there were no breadcrumbs. Just an empty house that looked exactly like a house should look on a Sunday morning. Detective Sergeant Tony Becker was one of the first investigators on scene. Years later, he would describe the feeling in that house as wrong, not because of what he saw, but because of what he didn't see. The normalcy of it was the horror, the untouched purses, the made beds, the complete absence of any evidence that 3 women had been forcibly removed from their home. He knew immediately this wasn't a voluntary disappearance. But how do you prove someone was taken when nothing proves they were taken? The investigation began the only way it could, with questions. Endless questions. Who saw the women last? Janelle Kirby and her boyfriend who dropped off Suzanne and Stacy around 2:30 a.m.? Who saw Sherrill last? Her friends from the card game who watched her drive away around 11 p.m.? What happened in that window? Those 3.5 hours between when Sherrill got home and when the girls arrived? And what happened after 2:30 a.m.? Investigators began canvassing the neighborhood. In 1992, this meant knocking on doors, asking if anyone heard anything, saw anything, noticed anything out of the ordinary. The results were frustratingly thin. One neighbor thought she might have heard a dog barking around 3 a.m. Another reported seeing a van, green maybe? Or was it white, parked on the street earlier that evening? But memory is tricky. Time distorts details. And no one reported hearing screams, seeing a struggle, or witnessing anyone being forced into a vehicle. This silence itself became evidence of a sort. If 3 women were kidnapped against their will, there should have been noise. Sherrill, by all accounts, was not a woman who would go quietly. Stacy was athletic and strong. Suzanne was young and healthy. For all 3 to be taken without a sound suggested something chilling. They either knew their abductor, or they were incapacitated before they could resist. Or both. The police began building profiles. Who would want to hurt Sherrill Levitt? She was a hairdresser, well-liked, no known enemies. Her ex-husband, Don Levitt, was quickly interviewed and cleared. His alibi was solid, and he showed genuine distress at the news. What about Suzanne? A teenage girl with her whole life ahead of her. Did she have enemies? Jealous rivals? Ex-boyfriends with grudges? Investigators interviewed dozens of her classmates, her teachers, anyone who might have held anger toward her. Nothing substantial emerged, and Stacy was practically a saint. Hardworking, devoted to her family, not the type to attract dangerous attention. She was almost certainly not the target. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, an innocent bystander who walked into a nightmare. If Stacy wasn't the target, then either Sherrill or Suzanne was, or both. But why? The first week of the investigation was a whirlwind of activity. Search parties combed the woods and fields around Springfield. Divers searched ponds and quarries. Every tip, no matter how bizarre, was followed up. Psychics called in, dozens of them, claiming to know where the women were buried, held, or hidden. None of them were right. The media descended on Springfield like a storm. This wasn't just a local story anymore. 3 women vanishing from their home without a trace in Middle America. This was national news. The faces of Sherrill, Suzanne, and Stacy appeared on screens across the country. America's Most Wanted featured the case. Tips poured in from every state. And still, nothing. I want you to understand, the The emotional weight of those early days. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, became the public face of the investigation. She appeared on television pleading for information, her voice breaking, her eyes red from crying and sleeplessness. She printed thousands of flyers with the women's faces. She organized search parties. She made this her full-time mission. Because what else could she do? Her daughter was gone. Her daughter was somewhere out there, maybe scared, maybe hurt, maybe... But she wouldn't let herself finish that thought. Not then. Maybe not ever. The community rallied around the families. Volunteers showed up by the hundreds. Local businesses donated money and resources. Churches held prayer vigils. The collective grief and fear were palpable. If this could happen to 3 women in a nice neighborhood, in a house with locked doors and a family dog, then it could happen to anyone. Springfield would never feel quite as safe again. The police worked around the clock. Detectives interviewed hundreds of people, friends, family, acquaintances, strangers who might have seen something. They built timelines and cross-referenced alibis and chased every lead, no matter how thin. And slowly, a few threads began to emerge from the chaos. Every investigation needs a focus, a direction. Without suspects, you're just throwing darts in the dark. And in those first weeks, the Springfield police began to zero in on several persons of interest. The first was a man named Robert Craig Cox. Cox was a convicted kidnapper who had served time for abducting a young woman in Florida. He was also suspected, but never charged, in the disappearance of another woman, Sharon Zellers, in Texas. By 1992, he was living in the Springfield area. And he had made statements to friends and acquaintances that made investigators sit up straight. According to witnesses, Cox had bragged about knowing what happened to the Springfield 3. He allegedly told people that the women were dead and would never be found. When confronted, he denied making these statements, but his denials weren't convincing. The problem was evidence. Without bodies, without physical proof connecting Cox to the crime, there was nothing to charge him with. He admitted to being in the area that night. He had the background of someone capable of this crime. But capability isn't proof. Cox remains a suspect to this day. He's currently serving a life sentence in Texas for an unrelated robbery, and he's given contradictory statements over the years. Sometimes he hints that he knows something. Sometimes he denies everything. He seems to enjoy the attention, the power that comes with holding secrets. If he knows the truth, he's never fully revealed it. Then there was Dustin Reckla and his brother Joseph. The Reckla brothers had attended some of the same graduation parties as Suzanne and Stacy that night. They were known troublemakers with criminal histories, and both had violent tendencies that put them on the radar. Dustin Reckla would later be convicted of murder in an unrelated case. He killed his girlfriend's mother in a brutal attack. His brother Joseph was involved in drug activity and violence. Both fit the profile of people capable of this crime. But again, there was no physical evidence connecting them to the disappearance. They had alibis that, while not airtight, couldn't be definitively disproven. And without bodies, without a crime scene, without a single witness, the case stalled. Let me pause here and ask you something. Put yourself in the shoes of these investigators for a moment. You're certain a crime has been committed. You're certain someone knows what happened. You have suspects who smell guilty, who have the means and the disposition. But you can't prove it. You can't even find the victims. What would you do? I I think about this question a lot. Justice isn't just about catching the guilty. It's about bringing closure to the families, about ensuring that victims aren't forgotten. But how do you deliver justice when the truth is locked inside someone's head and they refuse to let it out? If you were investigating this case, what would you prioritize? The known suspects? The anonymous tips? Something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you would do. Because the investigators in Springfield tried everything. They offered rewards, eventually climbing to over $40,000 for information. They appealed to the conscience of anyone who might know something. They even brought in federal resources, hoping fresh eyes might catch what local investigators had missed. And then a new name entered the conversation. Gerald Carnahan. Carnahan was a predator with a terrible history. In 1985, he had kidnapped and murdered a young woman named Jackie Johns. He wasn't convicted of that crime until 2007, 15 years after the Springfield Three disappeared. But even in 1992, investigators had suspicions about him. Carnahan operated in the Springfield area. He targeted young women. And his method of operation was chillingly similar to what happened on East Delmar Street. He approached victims at night, controlled them through fear, and made their bodies disappear for as long as possible. When Carnahan was finally convicted of Jackie John's murder, investigators returned to the Springfield Three case with new intensity. Could he be responsible for this too? The timeline worked. The geography worked. The victim profile worked. But Carnahan denied involvement, and once again, without evidence, without bodies, there was nothing to charge him with. 3 major suspects, 3 plausible theories, and 0 answers. The months turned into years. The investigation, while never officially closed, grew cold. Tips still came in, they always do in cases this prominent, but fewer and fewer led anywhere meaningful. And the families held on to hope, but that hope grew thinner with every passing season, and then something happened that would change everything, though the world wouldn't understand its significance for years to come. The year was 2000. 8 years had passed since Sherrill, Suzanne, and Stacy vanished. 8 years of birthdays missed. 8 years of Christmases without them. 8 years of that unanswerable question echoing in the minds of everyone who loved them. By now, the Springfield police had gone through multiple detective rotations. The original investigators had moved on, retired, or been reassigned. But the case files remained. Boxes and boxes of interviews, evidence logs, and dead-end leads. And every few months, someone would pull those boxes out and try again. That's the thing about cold cases. They never truly go cold for the families. For Janice McCall, every morning began with the same thought: where is my daughter? For the relatives of Sherrill and Suzanne, every holiday was haunted by empty chairs at the table. And for the citizens of Springfield, the case had become a kind of urban legend. Everyone had a theory. Everyone knew someone who knew something. The story was told in whispers at high school parties, invoked as a warning to teenage girls. Be careful, look what happened to those women. But urban legends don't solve crimes. Evidence does. In 2006, a new break emerged, or at least what appeared to be a break. A former employee of a construction company came forward with a startling claim. He said that back in 1992, shortly after the disappearances, he had been working on a project near a hospital that was under construction on the outskirts of Springfield. And he said he saw something strange. According to this witness, a concrete slab was poured, during a time when the site was supposed to be inactive. The pour was rushed, unscheduled, and didn't appear on any official work order. He didn't think much of it at the time. Construction sites are chaotic. Things get missed in paperwork. But years later, as he learned more about the Springfield 3 case, a terrible thought began to form. What if the women's bodies were buried under that hospital? The hospital in question was the Cox Medical Center South, and yes, the irony of the name was not lost on investigators, given that Robert Craig Cox was a prime suspect. But that was just coincidence. The hospital had no connection to the man. The witness's claim was investigated. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to scan the parking garage where the suspicious pour had allegedly occurred. The results were inconclusive. There were anomalies in the concrete. Something was down there. But was it human remains or just construction debris, buried and forgotten? The families pushed for excavation. Dig it up, they pleaded. If there's any chance at all, we need to know. But excavating a hospital parking garage isn't simple. It would cost millions of dollars. It would disrupt a functioning medical facility. And the evidence for doing so was based on one witness's decades-old memory and some ambiguous radar returns. The authorities hesitated. The families waited. And the years continued to pass. I want to tell you about Janice McCall during this period because I think understanding her helps us understand why this case refuses to die. Janice never stopped searching, not for a single day. She appeared at every anniversary vigil. She gave interviews to any journalist who would listen. She maintained a website dedicated to finding her daughter. She chased every tip, no matter how unlikely, with the desperate energy of a mother who couldn't afford to give up. But the toll was devastating. Janice's health deteriorated over the years. The stress, the grief, the endless cycle of hope and disappointment. It wore her down in ways that are hard to describe. She developed cancer. She fought it while still fighting for answers about Stacy. In 2011, Janice McCall lost that battle. She died without ever knowing what happened to her daughter. Think about that. 19 years of not knowing. 19 years of imagining the worst, hoping against hope, bargaining with God for just a sliver of closure. And then death. The final silence, with no answers at all. I can't think of anything more tragic, and I can't think of anything that makes me more determined to see this story through to its end. Because here's what I believe. Someone out there knows. Someone has carried this secret for 32 years, and that person has watched the family suffer, watched Janice McCall die without answers, watched an entire community remain frozen in grief, and said nothing. How do you live with that? How do you look at yourself in the mirror, knowing you could end decades of agony with a single phone call and choose silence? I don't have the answer. But I know this. Guilt has a way of eating people alive. And I have to believe, that someday someone's conscience will finally break. The pressure never stopped building. Every few years, the hospital theory would resurface. Media outlets would do anniversary pieces on the Springfield 3, and inevitably the conversation would return to that parking garage. What's under there? Why won't anyone dig? What are they afraid of finding? In 2012, 20 years after the disappearance, the momentum finally reached a tipping point. A group of documentary filmmakers announced they would fund a limited excavation. Technology had improved since 2006. New ground-penetrating radar systems could provide clearer images. If the results justified it, They would pay for a targeted dig. The families were cautiously optimistic. This was the closest they had ever come to actual excavation. But optimism was a dangerous thing for people who had been disappointed so many times. The scans were performed. The results once again showed anomalies. Something was definitely buried in the concrete. The shape and density were consistent with organic material, possibly human remains. But the property owners, the hospital system, remained reluctant. An excavation would be massively disruptive. It would cost more than anyone wanted to pay, and there was still no guarantee of what they'd find. The situation became a bureaucratic nightmare. The families wanted to dig. The investigators wanted to dig. The documentary makers had the funding. But without the property owners' cooperation, without clear legal authority to proceed, the excavation couldn't happen. Months of negotiations followed. Legal documents were drawn up. Engineers assessed the structural implications of breaking through the parking garage floor. Everyone wanted to do the right thing, but no one could agree on what that meant. And then finally, in 2013, a decision was made. A small area of the parking garage would be excavated, just enough to determine whether the anomalies were human remains or simply buried debris. The dig happened in January of 2013. I've read the reports, studied the photographs, talked to people who were there. The atmosphere was electric with tension, hope and dread in equal measure. The concrete was broken. The earth beneath was removed carefully by archaeologists trained in exhumation protocols. Every shovelful was examined for evidence. The families waited nearby, holding their breath, preparing themselves for whatever might emerge. After hours of digging, the team reached the anomaly. It wasn't human remains. It was construction rubble. Old rebar, broken concrete, the debris of a building project, buried and forgotten decades ago. The family's hearts broke all over again. I don't know how they found the strength to continue after that, to have hope rekindled and then extinguished so brutally. I'm not sure I could survive it, but they did. Somehow they did. And the investigation continued. The world changed a lot between 1992 and 2020. Technology that seemed like science fiction when Sherrill, Suzanne, and Stacy disappeared became commonplace. Genetic genealogy helped solve cases that had been cold for decades. Digital forensics cracked encrypted communications. Social media turned everyone into a potential witness. And slowly, these tools began to be applied to the Springfield 3 case. In 2020, investigators announced they were using new forensic techniques to re-examine old evidence. DNA technology had advanced to the point where trace amounts of genetic material, amounts that would have been useless in 1992, could now potentially identify suspects. The evidence collected from the Levitt house was pulled from storage. Items that had been cataloged and sealed for decades were subjected to modern analysis. The community held its breath once more. I want to be honest with you about what this means. When we talk about re-examining evidence, we're talking about a painstaking process that takes months or years, not days. We're talking about scientists working in labs, running DNA profiles through databases, hoping for a match that might point toward answers. There are no guarantees, there never are in cases like this. But there is something else happening that gives me hope. Something that didn't exist in 1992 or even in 2012. There is a community of people who refuse to let this case die. Online forums dedicated to the Springfield 3 have thousands of members. Podcasters have covered the case from every angle. Amateur investigators have compiled databases of tips and theories, cross-referencing information in ways that would have been impossible before the internet. This distributed investigation, powered by technology and obsession, has turned up leads that official investigators missed. It's also generated a lot of noise, false leads, crackpot theories, attention seekers. But somewhere in that noise, there might be signal. There might be the one piece of information that cracks this case wide open. Here's what I know for certain. The truth is out there. Someone knows what happened on June 7th, 1992. Maybe it's one of the original suspects, grown old with secrets. Maybe it's a relative or friend who was told something decades ago. Maybe it's someone who saw something and never realized its significance. That person is out there. And every time this story is told, every time someone shares this video, talks about this case, refuses to let these women be forgotten, the pressure grows. The truth wants to come out. It always does. Sometimes it just takes longer than we want. I need to tell you something now that isn't in the official reports, something that I've pieced together from multiple sources, from conversations with people close to the investigation, from years of studying every detail of this case. I believe the Springfield 3 case is closer to being solved than it has ever been. I can't give you specifics, not yet. There are legal considerations, ongoing investigations, and the need to protect sources who have trusted me with sensitive information. But I can tell you what I believe happened that night based on everything I've learned. I believe that someone came to the Levitt house in the early morning hours of June 7th. Someone who was known to at least one of the women, perhaps Sherrill, perhaps Suzanne. Someone who had a key, or who was let in willingly, or who arrived before the doors were locked. I believe this person was not acting alone. The logistics of controlling 3 adults, removing them from a house without signs of struggle, transporting them somewhere else, this suggests more than one perpetrator. Whether they were partners, accomplices, or simply people in the wrong place at the wrong time, I believe multiple individuals were involved. I believe the women were taken alive from the house. The lack of blood, the absence of violence at the scene, suggests they were controlled through threat rather than force. Perhaps a weapon, perhaps threats against each other, perhaps the promise that cooperation would mean survival. That promise was a lie. I believe the women were killed within hours of their abduction. I believe their bodies were disposed of with careful planning, a location chosen in advance, a method designed to ensure they would never be found. And I believe that at least one of the people responsible is still alive, still out there, still walking free, but not for much longer, because here's what's changed in the last few years. Investigators have narrowed their focus. The list of viable suspects has shrunk, and new technology is being applied to evidence that was collected 30 years ago, but never properly analyzed. DNA doesn't lie. And if there's a single hair, a single skin cell, a single trace of the person responsible preserved in those evidence bags, it's only a matter of time before they're identified. I want to speak directly to that person now. You know who you are. You've lived with this for over 30 years. You've watched the family suffer. You've watched investigators chase dead ends. You've probably felt invincible, untouchable. You got away with it, but you haven't escaped. Not really. You've carried this secret every day of your life. It's been there in every relationship, every quiet moment, every time you've closed your eyes and seen their faces. And now, science is coming for you. DNA databases are growing every day. Someone in your family is going to take an ancestry test. Someone is going to upload their genetic profile to a website. And when they do, a line is going to connect them to you, and you to that house on East Delmar Street. Your time is running out. But here's the thing. You have a choice. You can wait for the knock on your door. You can be dragged into a courtroom and have your name become synonymous with evil. Or you can come forward, you can tell the truth. You can give those families the closure they deserve. It won't erase what you did. Nothing can. But it might be the one decent thing you do with whatever time you have left. Think about it. This is the part of the story I want to tell you. The part that hasn't happened yet. The part that I believe, with everything in me, is coming. I see it clearly. A phone rings in the Springfield Police Department. A voice on the other end, maybe old, maybe young, maybe shaking with decades of suppressed guilt, says they have information. Real information. The kind that leads to answers, or maybe it's different. Maybe a DNA hit comes back from a lab in Virginia. A match to a person who was never on anyone's radar. A family member who submitted a genetic sample for innocent reasons, never knowing it would connect them to a monster. However it happens, the first domino falls. And then they all fall. I see investigators fanning out across the country, following leads that suddenly make sense. Evidence that was confusing for 30 years clicks into place. Witnesses who held pieces of the puzzle finally see how their pieces fit together. And then, the hardest part, they find them. Sherrill, Suzanne, Stacy. I don't know where they are. I don't know if they're buried in a field, sunk in a lake, hidden beneath concrete that no one thought to check, but they're somewhere, and they're waiting to be found. I see the moment when the families get the call. It's going to be devastating, that final confirmation of what they've known in their hearts for decades. But it's also going to be a release. The not knowing has been its own form of torture. The knowing, as painful as it will be, is also the beginning of healing. I see the arrest. The booking photo of someone who thought they'd gotten away with it. The perp walk into a courthouse where justice has waited for over 30 years. The trial where everything finally comes out, the how, the why, the terrible details that will haunt us but also explain. And I see the conviction. Guilty, guilty, guilty. It won't bring them back. Nothing can. But it will mean that their lives mattered. Their disappearance wasn't forgotten. The world didn't move on and leave them behind. And here's what else I see. I see Stacy McCall, reunited with her mother. Not in this world. That chance was stolen from them. But somewhere else. Somewhere beyond the reach of human cruelty. Janice spent 19 years searching, and then she was gone. But in the ending, I believe in the ending that has to exist for any of this to make sense. They find each other again. I see Sherrill Levitt holding her daughter one more time, the cosmetologist with the easy smile and the open heart, who invited her daughter's friends into her home because that's who she was. She doesn't ask why this happened. She just holds on and she never lets go. I see Stacy and Suzanne, best friends in life, linked forever in memory, together again. 19 years old forever, with futures that were stolen but not erased. Their potential lives on in the people who love them, who remember them, who refuse to let them be forgotten. This is the ending. Not yet written in the official record, but written in my heart. Written in the determination of every investigator who won't give up. Written in the prayers of every family member who still lights a candle on June 7th. Written in the collective conscience of a community that demands answers. The Springfield 3 are coming home. It's taken 32 years. It's taken technology that didn't exist when they disappeared. It's taken the relentless pressure of people who refuse to accept that this case would never be solved. But it's coming. The reunion is coming, the truth is coming, and when it does, we'll be here to tell the world. Remember where this started? A silent house on a summer morning. 3 women who were there one moment and gone the next. A mystery that broke every rule. But every mystery has a solution. Every criminal makes a mistake. Every secret eventually demands to be told. The Springfield 3 disappeared on June 7th, 1992. But they won't be forgotten. And they will be found. This story isn't over. It's just waiting for its ending. And that ending is coming. I can feel it. Can you?